Drew, are you ready?
I think so.
All right.
So I actually was thinking about this, and maybe before I start, I can get some like a feel for what people want to see. But I was planning on doing, originally, actually, this was Mark's idea, and he kind of laid out something, and then he couldn't be here. So I took over. So I was planning to do what he did, but this morning I was thinking, it might make more sense to ask what people want to see. So I know in the Discord, we were just talking about dynamic URLs. Like that's something I can definitely show off, but maybe there's other stuff that people would rather see. And, I can start laying out a page and doing some styling and some structure like that level. I can pop an API in and show how to like manipulate an API response. Those are the kind of things I was thinking, but does anyone have anything they'd really love to see? I'd love some direction. If not, I'll just guess, but just feel free to shout it out or chat it if you do.
I wouldn't mind seeing again a simple API. I remember the one you did some time ago with weather. It seemed pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
Or whatever, one that's, that you've seen or you've done that's didn't require a whole lot of additional figuring out because the API docs weren't very good.
Yeah.
Just something simple.
Yeah, I've got one that I think will be good. So we've been hammering on this NFT stuff, so I apologize. It's an NFT related thing, but this OpenSea API is really like easy. And for the example I was going to use, you just paste a URL, add a URL parameter, and it works. So I think that would probably do the job. And what's cool about it is it's easy to call it, but this is the response. It gets like these like complex responses that I can show some stuff on how to parse through that, or actually like in this case, if it's listing a bunch of NFTs, I was figuring I'd show how to set that into a grid list so you can list the NFTs. So yeah, I think that could make sense for sure. Should I just start there, or does anyone want to see me actually go into like, this is how I'd put a section and then a div inside of it and then style a centered columns? I can do that too. I feel like everyone's like, yeah.
Oh yeah.
All right, well, I'll just do that then. So I'll start with some structure style stuff since I got a few thumbs up there, and then I'll go right into that API. And then with the API, I can also do the dynamic URL thing mixed in there. But as I'm going, like literally stop me or chat if you want to see anything, ask a question, or want me to do a tangent, because that's kind of really the point. I'd love to just go off on tangents and do whatever people want to see.
Yeah, and Drew, we just got a chat from David. He's asking if you can just like briefly review what the left and right side bars are, like the navs. Yeah,
actually, why don't I'll start with like, I'll go through like everything we're looking at, all the panels, then lay out a page and go to APIs. That might make some sense. So what you're looking at right now is a brand new project, but I dropped a home page on and called it home. So I actually went here, dropped this blank page, and then just double clicked here and called it home. That's all I did so far. So basically you're just looking at a blank page here. And you can see off the bat, when I'm not selected on a page, there's just this left-hand menu. Basically, there's a couple things to drop stuff on the canvas. So you can drop pages, you can drop elements onto pages. Blocks are like, you can think of them as like more powerful elements. So when you start off, actually, there's a few like sections that are kind of pre-built, but what blocks are for is if you build like a little card with like a div, an image, and a text box, and you want to reuse that, you can save it as a block so that you can easily reuse it later, kind of like symbols. And then patterns are like an even more advanced version. You can drop a pattern onto your project and you'll get pages, styles, actions, whatever's in that pattern comes into your project. So you can use those pages, but also any of the actions or styles that it uses, you can use elsewhere in your project. So those are kind of like your main, like when you're creating, you're dropping things from here or copying and pasting from the page. That's why these are on the canvas in the center. And then on the left side, these are all like project level menu options. So workspaces and pages lays out. So if I had more pages, there'd be more pages listed here, but I can also create new workspaces in here. And a new workspace would be a separate section visually for me. So maybe I have like my front facing, user stuff. And then I have an admin section that I use. I'll make that admin section another workspace, but it's purely organization. It doesn't actually affect your end project. All the pages talk to each other. They're all on the same level, but it's just for your own sake. Below that, like there's data, which I'll go over when I'm doing this, but you just add data collections, which is like a database table, and then add fields under it. And then maybe I can even touch a little bit on in the next release, that section's getting very updated to where you're actually adding your data in and that kind of thing. But it's not here yet, so maybe I'll just touch on that. And then there's some like media library is all your images, fonts is all your fonts. Style classes would be just kind of like an overview of every style that's in your project. So as you add styles, they come into here, that kind of thing. I've rarely used these compared to some other things. They're more just like the repositories for these things. It's just where everything's stored. But down here are some actually really important ones. So URL routes is how you actually make a web page or a web app work. So if you want the homepage to be / and you want the admin page to be /admin, you might have 20 pages on your Builder canvas, but only 2 of those actually have URLs actually people go to. So this is where you set up those URLs and then you choose which page you want it to go to. So obviously using that one a lot, you have to. Page headers is another one that I tend to use a lot. If you're doing simple stuff, you don't even need this, but if you want to add an external CSS library like Bootstrap or Tailwind, if you want to add a JavaScript library to do anything advanced, you can come into page headers. And it's just an open box where, normally you type a page header like something like that, and you just type code into here, whatever you want. So sometimes when I really need to get hacky, when there's something that can't be done in a traditional way, and I really need to squeeze it into a Builder project, I'll just throw code in a page header. There's a lot of magic you can do in page headers, and you can pretty much pull anything out from them. Secrets, we can talk about with APIs maybe, but secrets is, it's a way to store values that you never want to be sent to the user's browser. So API keys, for example, are always secret. They're like a password. You don't want to share them. So we just have this system in Builder. It doesn't have to be an API key. Anything can be a secret. But if there's anything that's sensitive that you don't want people to see, your end users to be able to see, even if they hack into the JavaScript, you want to use a secret because it'll protect you. And that's actually, I don't think that no code talks about it too much because it's more of an advanced topic, but that's a vulnerability that a lot of no code tools have, is where they're exposing your API keys and stuff like that more than you realize. So it's a really cool feature that Builder just happens to have. Auth settings. This is like you do need to use these if you're setting up anything custom in your auth setup. Like if you want to do a wait list, if you want to approve people instead of just letting them right in. If you're sending emails out when people sign up or forget password, that kind of thing, you're doing that all in auth settings. But actually, to get an app running, you don't really all the defaults are good. If you want to just have an app where people are signing up with a password and signing in with a password, you actually don't even need to go in here. It's more like once your app's up and running and you're doing more of the advanced things, you might come into here. These 2 action types and element types are I would say the super advanced, basically. I mean, they're not too crazy once you learn them, but they're first thing is this is listing all the actions that I have in my project. And then the other one's listing all the elements I have in my project. And then it also contains all the functions that run those actions and elements. And it contains any libraries that you might need to run those. So there's a lot in here. But what you can do in this section is you can create your own actions. And that's where it's really powerful. And I know there've been some video tutorials. I know some of you are doing that, but it's basically more of an advanced topic. And the way it works from my point of view is when people need a new action in Builder, if someone suggests something in Discord and it seems like a good action everyone should have, I'm actually doing the same thing, or anyone on the Builder team is doing the same thing that you might do. We come into this action types, we create an action type through here. And then when it's done, because we're Builder, we have the ability to share it with you all. Soon you'll be able to share it yourselves too. But that's how every action is built in Builder, is through this. We're not coding the actions or anything. We're doing it in here. So these are super powerful. And like I said, anytime you need a new action or element, I take that, I come into here and I make it, and then we push it out to you.
Yeah, I think we did Mark, what was the most recent one, did the slider. I think Agneva had actually asked about that. And then
Slider
Mark
and
went-
console log just came out. And yeah,
Yeah.
and those are perfect examples of where they're actually pretty straightforward. Like a slider is just a special kind of input type. You just have a few different attributes. So he probably went into this elements list. He found input, wherever it field input here, and then just duplicated it and then made it into a slider. Like that's the kind of level that we're talking about. And then console log, same thing. It's an action, but in the action functions, you're actually writing JavaScript. So he, there's something like this, and he just types console log, and then, it does it kind of like what Builder does is it wraps up that JavaScript. Console log's like the most simple JavaScript you can do, but anything that was in there, Builder wraps it up into that nice visual action for you. And then, yeah, lastly, deployments and deployments. It's a complex topic and there is a lot of confusion around it. But when it comes time to publish, the very quick version of what you're doing with deployments is you're always working in your development deployment. That's what you see in the studio. That's what your live preview is. That's development. And then when you're ready to publish, you can publish to a production environment, or you can publish to a test environment, or you can make a million new environments and publish to them. And each of those environments gets its own URL, whether that's something.builder.com or whether that's your custom domain. And so when you publish into them, you can basically, you're testing your app at different states. So your development is always what you're working on, but you might have a version in test that is stable, so your client can test it. You can still work in development. It's not going to affect test until you publish to test. So this deployment section is actually it's kind of like how styles and fonts and images are. It's just the main section that's going to hold all your deployments. And then if you click on them, there's some info, some settings on each deployment. But truthfully, you rarely need to use this too, because you're coming up to this publish menu when you publish, and you're just saying publish from development to production. If it doesn't have a URL, you set one, and that's all you need to care about. The rest would be like if you're doing backups, you need to revert or something, that's where you come into deployments.
Yeah, so you can publish directly from dev to production if you know exactly what you're doing. If you are working with other people and you need a testing project, please publish to test and go test it out before you push to production and break your stuff. Just FYI. But Drew is usually like, he knows everything and he's like building in his project. So he is pretty gutsy and he does that successfully.
I wouldn't do it for something like Bildr, obviously, but what's funny is coming from a code background, like I used to have to set up test environments. And so like, I'm not going to do that. Like if I'm building a project, I don't feel like setting up a test environment. So I skip it. I always used to skip it unless it was like a large client project where it's needed. And so I have that habit of going right to production, and I'm not picky. Like even sites that I run that have hundreds of users, like I don't care if I push out a bug, I don't care. I'll just fix it. So yeah. That's me, but not everyone's like that. And then last in this menu, and I'll go a little faster too. I realize this is kind of taking forever, but last is collaborators, which you can add unlimited collaborators to your projects, and they basically have all the same rights that you have in the project. So they can publish it, they can change things, they can do whatever you want. And if you want officially to make them the owner from in here, you could set them as the owner of the project too, transfer the project. We're getting deeper into discussions about like levels of collaborators. So in the future, in the nearish future, I'd say we'll have more in there where maybe some collaborators can't publish, they can only edit stuff, and maybe some can just edit the data. Like if you want to have a client in there, but you don't want them to touch the site. So that'll get built out. But for now, you just add people to your project and they have access. And then project settings is pretty straightforward, but like this project image will be your fave icon, stuff like that. And region becomes important. So if you're in the United States and you think your customers are in the United States, it defaults, or at least it might default by IP address because I'm in the United States, but for whatever reason, this one defaults to the United States. If I knew that my app was like going to serve people in another region, I could actually change the region, which is like where my files and site are coming from. So if I'm in India and I change the region to somewhere closer to India, it'll be faster. That's what that's for. most of the time, because I'm in the United States, I actually rarely touch this, but it makes more sense for other places. And then down here, super important one is these lessons. So hopefully you've seen this if you've been in Builder, but we do have these in studio lessons, and sometimes they'll pop up on the top. Let me see if I can stay. Like if you put something onto your canvas,
Like a
you'll
light
see a little
box,
bar
yeah.
up here. That just shows you there's a lesson about whatever you did, and you can always click on it, view the lessons, and basically like you're signed in. So Builder's going to remember what you've seen and not seen. And so if you're in here, like on step 3, and then you come back, it's going to put you right to step 3. And when you watch things, it'll mark them as watched on this main list, stuff like that. Like see right here, it says I'm on step 3 of 6. So you can essentially just go through this at any time. If you're in the middle of a lesson, you're watching it, you can just kind of like close this, try something, come back in. It's really convenient as far as learning. And what we're doing is we're just slowly building this out. Like it's got this many lessons right now, but in the future it will have, I don't know, hundreds. So yeah, so that's the left panel. And then, like I said, I'll go through the other ones a little faster because that took a long time. But basically that's when I'm off. Let me clear this out. When I'm not selected on a page, these are the menu options I have. But then as soon as I select on a page, I get more. So this right here, it'll default like this under elements. This left panel is controlling my elements, everything that's on the page, and my flows, all the actions that are, all the interactivity and actions that are on this page. And so this menu here, this is specific to this page. These elements are on this page, these flows are on this page. And if I add an element to the page and I'm selected on it, then I get this right-hand menu. This menu is specific to this element. So I'm selected on this element. I have some tabs like properties, styling, and events. That all has to do with this element. So every element, depending on what type it is going to have different properties, depending on what it does. Every element's going to have styling, which is the same. And that's adding CSS to that element. So that's kind of a universal thing. All styling is the same. You're adding classes, you're adding styles. And then events is how you layer in that interactivity. So once you have something and it looks nice and it's styled, you can say on click, I want to run autosave, and you run the flows, which are over here. And then some elements also get a data tab. That's how you now tie in the database. So if you have data in your database and you want that to automatically show up as the text in an element, you're going to use that data tab. In this case, I have a div, which there's no way to bind data to a div element. So there's no data tab here, but it would be there. And then similarly, on the right side, if you're selected on a flow, the details of that flow are going to show up on the right side. So you kind of have like your page here, you're controlling your page level items on your left. And when you click on anything on the left or on your canvas, it's going to open a detail on the right. And that's basically how it's set up. There's definitely way more in there, like in each one, but that's kind of the overarching thing. And from there, you're basically like when I'm working, I'm going back and forth through all these menus. And what's cool about it is they all keep context. So like if I'm editing an element, but I'm looking at flows and selecting a flow and there's a flow pulled out plus like another flow inside of it, when I close that box, it'll open right back to the element I was on. So a lot of times I'm just flying back and forth from, you kind of have to, when you're building, is go back and forth through all these menus. What else?
I think that's it, Drew, for the basics. Let's get into it. That was awesome. And you'll see more as you're actually building.
Yeah. You'll definitely get a feel for what's what. So when I start a project, like any project, any page, I pretty much do the same thing because this is a website after all. Even if I'm making a complex web app that doesn't feel like a website, they're all websites. And my background's in coding, so I know enough about HTML and setup to know what I should do. And I kind of simplified my process into this basically, which is I drop a page on. First thing I do is so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a header. I'm going to have a section that's open, and then I'm going to create a footer. And that's basically what I do on every page, even for a web app. And that header is included on every page, but it's the same file. So my menu might be up there, my logo is usually up there, that kind of thing. And that's one source of truth. So I'll have one page that is my header. So I can start with that. I can actually create a page separate of my main page that's going to just be a header. So I'll call it header. And you can imagine this might have like a logo on it. So I'll just stick an image in there for now. And that image is huge. So what I do, and this is something I do a lot while building, is I'll go to the styling tab and I'll add an inline style that's temporary. So because I know that's huge, I'll come into inline styles and I'll say max width is 100 pixels. And so now I can see that's just out here on my inline styles, which means in code, this image tag is written. And then on the actual image tag, there's extra code that says style equals max width 100 pixels. And so the reason I mentioned that is because I actually don't like to keep things on inline styling when it goes into production, and you can't do responsive on inline styling. So it's just a note, I'm going to be removing this or moving it into a real class. But for now, that's quick. Make it 100 pixels. Now I can see this header. And then what I'm going to do on my homepage, let me make this a little bigger, is I'm going to include a component page. And a component page is an element, or a component element, sorry. A component element just includes another page. So it looks blank. It looks like just a thin line. But if I'm selected on this component and I go over to the properties, it has one property of component page. So if I set that to header, you can see now the header is actually included in there. So if I had another page, and I'll just do this quickly, say like an about page, I can drop that same header in. So I'll drop a component, set it to header. And now you can see I've got 2 pages with that header. And if I change that header, it updates in both spots. And I can't update that header directly on the pages because it's included as a component, but I can click this go to component page and it takes me to where I can edit it. So that's the first step, is I'll throw a header in there. And then while we're in there, I might as well just throw a footer too. So I'll do a similar thing. I put the component in, I add a page, I call it footer. And a lot of times when I'm working, I'll make this footer like this. And like, I don't even know what's in the footer yet. And I don't really care. It's like, I just want the component in there. So I'll just do this. And it's actually blank, but I know that I'm putting this on all my pages as I build them, so that in the future, whenever I add something into footer, it's going to just show up on all my pages. So that's kind of like step one, header and footer, like universal, at least for me, it's pretty universal. And then what I do is I have this system where in the middle of the header and the footer, that's where the page content goes. I do the same thing every time. I come up to elements, and in this top section called page sections, header, footer, section, and container. I'll use these headers and footers in a section in the actual header and footer components. But what I do for other components that aren't header and footer, I always start with a section. So just drop that in between these. And then I always put a container. So right next to section is this container right inside of that section. And so if you drop it on here on the left menu, it's going to drop right inside. I notice when working with people, a lot of people are dropping onto the canvas, especially when you start. And so you might try to drop an element like into this blue here. You can do it and it works, but it's so much easier just to drop on this left side. And actually, I'm slowly getting the habit of coming up to here on the hover and hitting this plus. So say this container, I wanted to add a div in it. I can actually go here, plus, and then just click the div once. And it's going to insert it right where I put it. And that is faster. And that's new. That just came out, I think, last release. But that's like, you don't ever have to worry about dragging and dropping and getting a little finicky, because the dragging and dropping is pretty advanced, but also sometimes it's a little finicky. So yeah, so I'll remove this for a second. I'm probably gonna add that back in, but the point of this is section is a full width wide section that is gonna span the full width of the page. So you can imagine your page as sections going down, like blocks going down your page. Section is like one block. So there's a component block, then there's a section block, whatever's inside of it doesn't matter. And then there's another component block. That's my like top level on my page. But the section goes full width. And if I have like a 2000 pixel wide screen, I don't want my site to be 2000 pixels wide. I want it to be a centered column. That's where container comes in. Container is it's not it's Builder specific in this case, but actually Webflow does the same thing with the same names, section and container. But what container actually is, it's not an official HTML thing. It's a div that's called container, and it has specific styles on it. So when you drop container, it comes with a container class, and the container class has a max width and a margin left and a margin right of auto. Margin left and margin right of auto is actually what centers it. And then the max width, it would dictate the widest that container section can be. So in this case, I have my container section set to 1200 pixels, which means my section's full width on the outside here. And then if the screen's 2000 pixels wide, my section's 2000 pixels wide. The container inside of it is thinner. It's 1200 pixels max. And then it gets centered with the margin left and right auto. So what that does is that creates a system now where I can have multiple sections and multiple containers. And so I'll actually just demo this out. So you go section and container, or like what I end up doing usually is on this section, you can either go copy and then paste with children. That'll put it in, or you can go duplicate. And you'll just copy those sections with the children. So down your page, like maybe this is like your hero section. Maybe this is, and actually I'll just write these in here. This would be like hero. This would be like features. You get the idea as it goes down the page. But if I preview this, well, let me add some colors actually for you. So this features section, and again, I'll do this in inline styles because it's temporary. I'll just come in and say, oops, background color blue. And then the container inside of it, inline, I'll say background color red. Okay, and now when I preview this, you can get the idea that that section, which is blue, goes full width. The container, which is 1200 max, is the red. And if I shrink my browser below 1200 pixels, you can see the blue will go away because that container div is 100% with a max width of 1200 pixels. So I don't know if that was a little too in the weeds, but the point of that is that I do that for every project, and that's the basis of everything I do, because when I have multiple sections in here, they'll all line up really nicely. And I apologize just to do this, just to show you this, but it's good, I think, to wrap your head around because it just eliminates problems as you're building. What did I do that on? Oh, I didn't put
And
anything
as
here.
you guys are doing that, we did a whole Builder hour on styling that covered a lot of this and went into a bunch of details. So I will chat out a link to that, and then also our favorite resources from the whole team for learning like CSS and styling. So it'll be helpful for you guys to reference. That way we can keep moving when Drew's ready.
Yeah, and I think like I won't go too much into individual styling exactly for that reason, but like this is a good example of what I just did, where sometimes you do stuff in Builder and then it looks, you might not expect there to be like a space, like a white space in between these. And that's not because Builder is injecting anything, actually. That's because default HTML would look like this. So if I were coding and I had a div that was a section, a div that was a container, and a text box, and then a div text box, this is actually exactly what it would look like. And these spaces, because I know HTML, I know that the space is coming from a margin on this H2, like on this header. And so a lot of times what you're doing in Builder is you're seeing stuff like that and you don't know, or you might not know where it's coming from. So what you do is you right click on something and you inspect it. And it shows you a layout of, all the code that's on your page. But when you click on these individual elements, you can also see the styles they have. And on this H2, this might be like a little tricky to find if you're new to HTML, but there is styles here for like margin block start, 0.3M block end. They're basically default margins on an H2 and HTML. So what I actually do in this case, this would be a simple one for me. I might not do it in this way. I would probably just go fix it. But what I normally do is I'm like, okay, how do I fix this space? I see these here. You can actually go to this top level one, element style, and add, like I was doing in the studio, add inline styles to this H2. So I can say margin 0. And then on the one below it, I can also say margin 0. And it fixes it. And so that's like a very random example. Like it might, if you don't know HTML, like I said, it might take you a while to actually figure out that's what's going on. But once you figure out like, oh, margin 0 on the H2, this isn't saving live, obviously, this is just in the browser. So you come back into Builder, and then I can actually come to this, like this element's a heading. So I can come here. What I was doing in the studio is I was adding an inline of margin 0. If I did it this way, I'd have to add it to every header that I have on the page, because this inline only applies to one element. So what I'm actually going to do is add it into, I can add a utility class if I think I only want to use this sometimes, or if this is universal. If I say every heading on my site, I want to remove the margin, I'll just come into this primary style class of heading, which is on every heading. So it affects every heading, and do it there. And I'll say margin 0. You can see it fixed it there, but also if I refresh in here, it's fixed. So that's like styling for me. I would say 80% of is putting stuff on the page, looking at it, going in inspector, figuring out what I need to change, going back, making the change in the studio. So yeah, so that's like a basic styling and section, and like using headers and footer components to set up your site. I don't know if you want me to go, if anyone wants to see more in that vein, but basically from this point out, it would get completely custom to whatever you're building. So I don't know, you know, I can probably go into like APIs or something else that makes sense at this point. And I haven't been seeing the chat. I see a lot of stuff, a lot of numbers in the chat. So I don't know if people are asking.
Yeah, there's actually a lot in here, but I know we did promise that people were interested in seeing APIs. So we're going to have to kind of like pick and choose, and I'll try and share resources to cover some of the things that might not. Peter thinks, or Tom says API can wait. It's not just you that wanted to see APIs, Tom. It was several other people as well. Yeah. So let's see. We are at 10:44, which means like 15 minutes left. So let's just do a time check real quick. Drew, what's your stop for today? That way we can figure out if we can make it go a little longer and people just can watch the recording later, or if we can tackle some more of these.
I can definitely go longer. I'm wondering if maybe I should just keep going on this and then do another one where we go into more APIs, because that took 45 minutes. It's kind of crazy. Like I don't want to just squeeze in the rest, but I can go till whenever. So whatever everyone wants to do.
Okay. We'll do a few of these things, but there are specific questions on how to do like flyouts and stuff like that. Let's wait on those till the end. Those can also, we can always make little tutorials for those outside of Builder Hour and send them to whoever is asking, and then, or just post them in Discord. But let's, we'll take Peter's question real quick. He's asking, when do you have to use a div? When do you use a div?
That's a really great question, actually. And I think, especially if you come from no code, it takes a second to wrap your head around this, but like when you're using code, so when you normally be coding, you're writing divs manually, you can do whatever you want. Like there's standards and there's specs and there's things that work and don't work, but really like you can do whatever you want. And a div is actually like a catch-all. It's a box on a website. So if you add a div, you're adding like a square box to a website, but it has no properties, has no margins. The only property that it has is it's going to go full width. Like it does have that, but really it's just this like very generic container that can contain anything. And so I actually like, basically I'm using a div for everything. Like when I build, I'm wrapping everything in divs. If I have a header and a text box, and that's kind of like contained together in a logical section, I wrap it in a div. Even if I don't need to, like the div isn't doing anything visually, it just contains it. That helps me a lot. So like on this left side, everything's organized. And if I want to move it, I can just move that div. If I want to hide all those elements at once, I can hide that outer div. So I use divs almost like I would say like as a catch-all, like for anything. But actually, even these, like this section right here, it's actually, if I go into properties, the HTML tag is section, and you could change it to a div. But in HTML, a section tag is a div, and a header tag is a div, and a footer tag is a div. That's all on this list. All they are is they're just like slightly more semantic ways of making a div. Like everything in HTML is a div. So to answer your question, like you use it always, like for everything basically. But I would kind of categorize it as like more of an organization thing, where it's like you're containing different sections or different things that relate to each other in divs. And then that just kind of like, depending on what you're doing, you know, that's going to allow you to do complex interactivity with those sections. It's going to allow you to stay organized in your own head when you're looking at it, that kind of thing. But it's just, you know, a box, the most base level of HTML elements.
Okay, cool. Emmanuel, you've got your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yeah, real quick. When you did the header and the footer part, you actually created a new page and named it as such. But if you look in element, there are in the top row a header and a footer element. So I was wondering what the difference is between those two.
Yep. That's another great question. So for this header that I made, it was basically temporary. I just like threw some stuff in. But what I really do for headers is the actual header page is a page in Builder. So that's what's getting included. And whatever I put on that page is going to be, you know, outputted as code on that page. So I make a header page to physically include, and the first thing I put on it is the header element. This header element is nothing special. It's a div. And so like it doesn't even, it's got a class called header on it in Builder so that you can do things with it, but the class is blank. There's no styling on it. There's nothing. What it is it's semantic, which is a big thing. So when you write HTML, you're thinking usually in terms of people viewing it with their eyes, but there's a whole like, you know, percentage of the web that it's viewing it in all these different ways, whether it's a screen reader because someone's blind, or whether it's, who knows, like maybe they're like in their car and something's reading it to them. Like there's like all these different reasons why people view HTML or web pages in different contexts. So there's a big emphasis on being semantic in your code, which helps those screen readers and helps those tools know what it's looking at without visual, like without eyes. So if I have a div in the top of my page and then another div and then another div, a screen reader might not know what the differences are. If I call that top div header, now the screen reader understands it's a header. So it's basically a best practice. But under the hood, that header element is no different than a regular div. So I just use that one in my header, and then in the footer, I just use the footer one. But yeah, like I said, it's just a div.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Super.
Hey, Drew, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Edmund.
Sorry, quick question here, Drew. So I just want to get very in lay terms. You're essentially using the header as like a repeatable block, because when you change something in the header, wherever you're using it, it changes. And if you're approaching your build with this kind of systemic approach, it allows you to build pages without having to go through and change everything every time.
Exactly. Which is huge. Like, you know, if you get far into a project and then you need to change the header menu, like that could save you hours.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, components are awesome. And you can either use the component element, or if you actually build something out, you can just turn that parent into a block and it'll show up in your blocks list, and you can drag and drop that. So there are a few different ways to kind of build something.
Yeah, and I think
once and then
that's a good
reuse it.
point too. Like this header that I include with the component, it's always going to be this header. But if I like had this, say I have this whole section of this red features and I want to use it again, I can actually, if I'm on this element, I can do this right here, set as block. That makes it a different kind of component basically. So now in this block menu, I'm going to have this section here, this custom one I made. And the difference is if I want to put that on a different page, I can drop that on. And now it copied everything. So it has all the styles, all the elements. Like, see, there's 3 elements in here. It copies everything, but it's not linked up to the original. So I can actually come into this section and change the background to be like, you know, pink. And, oh, whoops, I got to change the inside background. And then, yeah, it won't affect the original one. Whereas if I did that in a component element, like if I did that in the header, it would change every one. So there's a slight difference between the blocks, but the blocks are really good for like, if you have a lot of elements that are the same, but slightly different each one, you create that initial block and then you're just dropping them on, tweak, drop it on, tweak, drop it on, tweak. That's more what it's for.
Yeah, I like to use that, for example, if I've made like a really nice input field for something with like a label or a button, and I say I might use that on the sign up page and make it look a little bit differently. And then I might use that, you know, on a contact us page. Like I will grab that and then just turn it into a block and then just tweak it. Otherwise, components are awesome for the things that you will be repeating and using on multiple pages that you want to keep the same across all. Okay, cool. So I think I don't have anything else on styling. Agniva does have a question on how to do something specific with the carousel slider. So I was thinking maybe like for the things that are like, how do I build this thing? We kind of like wait for the end and do that. And then maybe we can let you go a little bit further, Drew, with setting up an API or something. What do you think?
I'm down to do anything. I feel like at this point it's late to get into APIs because I would have to like get into it all and set it up. So I don't know if there's enough time, but I'm more than happy to do it if people want. And I don't mind whatever. Showing specific stuff is fine too. I think there's enough questions about this, like even more than I expected, that it makes sense to stay where we are if people still have questions.
Okay, yeah. Does anyone have questions on styling? Agniva was saying that he had a question about adding a carousel slider to his site. He's using Bootstrap for it, but for some reason it doesn't work. Do you want to wait for like troubleshooting stuff at the end?
I mean, I can touch on that. I would have to like grab a Bootstrap slider because I haven't used that in years actually.
If you want, you can come into my project if it's fine with you.
We can do that if you want. I think also I can probably lay out the general and let me know if this is how you have it set up. But you're going to have the Bootstrap header as a page header first and foremost. That'll pull in the Bootstrap library. Then you're going to have whatever element, like whatever container is going to turn into this carousel slider. You have to have that div on your site, like on your page.
I did have all those, yeah.
And then you have to run an action called run JavaScript function, which will run depending on how Bootstrap set up. So is that a kind of thing where when your page loads, it converts it to the carousel slider automatically?
I don't know, like, you know, when the Bootstrap loads, I think they just have a CDN input in it, and then again it works. Like I don't know like absolute details of that. But
I think what's happening, I know what it does is it just converts something on your page into like their slider. It basically adds the JavaScript and styles needed to convert it.
Exactly.
So what I'm thinking is the page header is probably firing before the elements on the page. So what you'll need to do is just do a run JavaScript action and either refire the Bootstrap. So there's a command in Bootstrap, which we can look this up. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but there's something you can do that's going to like rebind Bootstrap. It's going to like look for all the Bootstrap stuff and redo it. So you basically need to run that. And the reason, like I said, is because the page header loads before the rest of the page loads. So it's it's looking for anything Bootstrap before anything's actually in the page. It's a common thing with Builder and third parties. And yeah, the way around it is you do the run JavaScript action, or you make a custom element, because you could make a custom element for a slider that pulls in the libraries exactly when it needs to, and then just handles it. That would be option 2. But yeah, I don't know if that makes enough sense to go on, or if you think like, I don't even know what I would search for actually.
I mean, you can actually search. You can actually go and go for the Bootstrap, get started. And you will be able to see this CSS files, this JS CDNs, and Just search above, right? In the search docs, carousel, be able to find that. Yep. There it goes.
Yeah.
I mean, not this one. I mean, second one, like for say.
This, what do you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Like I just added those as you have said yesterday, like, about
Yeah.
the ID thing, right? I just set it up all on JSON and like, I'm a fast learner. So I just did all those and it did work out. But, for the functionality, it doesn't work that way. Like,
It just is, it's definitely firing at the wrong time. I would have to find
Mhm.
the command that kind of
Okay,
like
so
fires these off, which I can do too. I can also help you later in this if we can't find it quickly.
absolutely not a problem.
But it's like I know the exact problem, and I don't think it's too complicated. It's just like a timing issue. I'll find it just so I'm not like searching through docs in this call. But I'll find it and send it to you, and it'll be like one line that you paste into this function, and it'll.
Oh,
everything-
so it was there, I think, in the introduction, right? I mean, in the introduction, with a script tag, see the JS bundle, I guess.
this right
essential.
here, fire. This is like what you include, right? And it's gonna fire the thing I'm looking for automatically. What I
Okay.
need to find is how to fire it manually, and there's always a way.
Okay.
It's just like I
Mhm.
don't know where it is in their docs right now.
Not a
But yeah,
problem, not a problem.
that's definitely
Yeah.
a timing thing, and I think too, like, so if you did a custom element, you have these like options in here where you can actually include the Bootstrap in this page header here. And what that's going to do is that's going to like time it correctly in Fire. When you include page headers in here, which is the default easy way, they
Mhm.
always run instantly. Like they run before the HTML of your page loads, basically.
Exactly. That was the reason I was like looking for the footer. How can, like, down the body text, body area.
Gotcha.
So
Okay, so it sounds like Agniva might go the element route and then just add the page header there, or he can use the run JavaScript. You just need
Yeah, I
to
mean,
find
the
whatever-
element route is easy to add a page header there, but then you'd also would have to like build out your element. So it's you could do it actually because it's not like the craziest thing, but you have to be in JavaScript and output the tags you want and all that. So the fastest way would probably be to find that little run JavaScript command.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
So Agniva, if we don't remember by the end of this call, can you chat it in the Discord?
okay, not a
then-
problem. I mean, I'm always there in the Discord, and
Yeah,
you guys are
and
like
then
the
we
best.
can definitely look at your project.
Absolutely.
And then Peter does have a question related to styling. He's asking how to make pages responsive in mobile. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Responsive in general is kind of a big topic. Like you can go crazy with responsive.
Mhm.
So obviously I can't go like full in depth of like all the different things that you do, because basically like just to give you an example, like if I make a full-fledged site that's fully responsive and customers are using, like I have tons of changes at different breakpoints. I have like font sizes changing, little colors changing, rounded corners changing, layouts shifting. Like there's a lot that I'm doing, and it seems complex, but at its basic form, all you're doing is at different screen sizes, you're changing CSS properties. And so if you want to like kind of take a simple approach to responsive, there's two like tricks, like two like base level things that get you like 80 or 90% there. The first thing is you set everything up with percentages or M's as units. So like on these elements, so I have this features H2 here. If I want to change the font size, and you might do this, you might come to font size and you say, I want it to be 48 pixels, right? That works and you see it visually, but that's not really great for responsive, because even on a phone at a small size, that's going to be 48 pixels. It might be too big. So I almost never use pixels. That's the first thing. Unless I really know like an image is going to be 100 pixels everywhere, I almost never use pixels. So for a font, I would use either percentage or M. I'm almost always using M for font. It's actually a font specific one. So but M is very similar to percentage if you're just thinking about it. So if I did 2M, that's roughly like 200%. If I do all my fonts in M's, Then what I can do is for responsive, when the screen gets to mobile size, I can change the base font size on the body tag to be smaller, and the M's are relative. So everything on my site will shrink and get smaller. And the reason I point that out is because the trick to it is using M. So even if you don't know how to do that last part yet, where you shrink all the sizes at small screen, if you know when you're building and that everything you do, you're setting fonts to M's instead of pixels, you're like more than halfway there. Then you can just, at the end, you flip that last switch and everything's going to work responsive. Similarly, like for this container, well, container is a bad idea because I actually did want that in pixels, but like I have max width here. I could set max width to like 50% instead of a pixel value. And then what that does is no matter what happens, no matter what screen size it's at, it stays 50%, right? So you can see that red and that purple are always going to be like half the screen, no matter how small the screen gets, they're taking up half the screen. And that's because I use percent instead of pixels. Point is, if you use percent and use M's, you're going to be like 90% of the way there or whatever on responsive off the bat. So a lot of times people think of responsive as this thing they have to come in and do afterwards. And it's this thing that they need to like plan and think about. But really, if you're using a percentage width instead of a pixel width, 9 times out of 10, it's just going to be responsive. Like I'm not actually even doing an official media query, doing anything responsive. I'm just setting it to a percent instead. And that's like helping me out. And so like, this is a really kind of like simple, weird example, but imagine if you had 3 boxes side by side. If you make that width of each box 300 pixels, you're gonna have to do all this extra styling to make it centered. And when the screen's smaller than 900, you have to shrink them and all this stuff. It adds all this extra work for responsive. If instead you make each of those 3 boxes 33%, so it's always just 1/3 width, then you literally don't have to do anything else to those styles. They're responsive, they're going to shrink down, that kind of thing. And then, so that's like your base, I would say. And it's really like, it's something that you learn over time by making something the wrong way. And then you realize it's really hard to make it responsive. So the next time you're like, oh, I need to do that in percent. It's like very trial and error, but that's how you do it. And then the next level of responsive is like, what I would say is like more like true responsive, which is media queries. And that's all done in this device. So when you're looking at styles and you see the styles here, max width, margin left, margin right, I'm on the device all. I can hit any of these other device sizes and change a style. So say for all, I want the max width of this to be 50%. But when I get down to 768 width screen, so I hover over this tablet and a little tooltip comes up, it says 768. When the screen's 768, instead of the red and purple being 50%, I want them to be full width, 100%. I make that change there. And it's denoted here that that's a media query. And if I go back to all, ooh, that didn't work. That's weird, a little bug.
I think you
Oh,
might
it
just
didn't
be
select that.
stuck.
My computer might be frozen. That's why. I saw that comment about the M1. That's what I need. I have the 13-inch, but this is my desktop. There we go. Sorry, I just took a second. I think I added an extra style into there. Well. So anyway, if it didn't freeze up, I changed this one to 50%. And I come back to all, and it should be at 100. It's sums up with it right now. Or, oh, I did that. Sorry, I did that backwards. It's fine. I changed that to 100% at that one, 50% of all. So because I was a little confusing, I'll just recap really quick. On the default, we set the max width to 50%. When it gets to 768, the max width changes to 100%. And what that translates to is on here, the screen width. So right now I open Inspector and I'm just moving this to change the screen width. Little trick is you can actually click on this toggle device button, and then it's going to give you the dimensions at the top. You can set it if you say like, I want to know exactly what this looks like on an iPhone or like that kind of thing, or you just set it to responsive. And then there's this bar you can drag here. So you can test responsive. So I can watch this width up here at a screen width of 1240, which is what this is. These middle ones are 50%. And as soon as I go under 768, you'll see they'll jump. So I'm coming up 800, And see that jump? So because I set that breakpoint, it's jumping to 100%. And so what you have to do for responsive then is you have to just plan this all out. You just have to think, okay, if a user's on this size screen, does this look good? What do I have to change? What properties do I have to change to make it look good? You know, if it's a bigger screen and they have more real estate, can I space things out more? Like you just think of like what would help a user, and then you have to design for it at each of these breakpoints. That's kind of like the general, like the most high level overview of responsive I can give. And then what it comes down to is you need to just like really trial and error and think about what people want. And like all day, what I'm doing is I'm in here, I make something, I click this device thing, and then I check it. I'm like, looks good, looks good, looks good. I'm like, oh, when it gets to this size, I might want to change it. So I look 454. I'll go in here. I'll check these sizes. If there's something close enough, like 320, 480, that's a little too big. I'm not sure. I just go to more and the plus, and then I can make my own, like whatever that was, 454. I always just name them the same thing like that. And now I have this like new breakpoint. And so at 454, if I want, you know, this is a dumb example, but I can make it go to 20%, you know? So you can see there, it's already 20, it's 100 there. And then when it gets over 768, it goes to 50%. So it's like, that's like a weird example because all I'm doing is changing widths, but you take that concept and you build it out into every single thing you want to do. So if you have 3 things side by side and you want them stacked on mobile, you're changing the display style usually. If you have, you know, widths, you're changing the percentage widths, the max width you use a lot, you know, those kind of things. But without like a specific project, I don't know what more I could add to that, but basically you take those concepts and then you practice. That's kind of how responsive works.
All right, thank
So
you.
Drew,
Excited.
go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I mean, the visual presentation has helped me, so I'm pretty good. I'll just implement everything I suggested.
Okay, cool.
Excited.
Yeah, so I think, Drew, would you recommend like you just start by just designing for the web first and like what you're seeing, and then kind of go back in and think about what do you want to do for mobile? Some people, I mean, you don't have to get to the granular level where you're designing for every single kind of device. Sometimes it's enough just to have your all, which will work for tablet and PC, and then just do something for mobile, which will generally catch a lot of the other devices. Would you say that's probably more accurate?
Yeah, I mean, it really also depends how good you are with CSS, to be honest. It's like, because I have a lot of experience with CSS, when I build stuff, I actually build it at a desktop view, and I build it in a way that I know is responsive 99% of the time. And then at the end, I go through and make a couple tweaks for like little things that need to be finessed, basically. But like 90% of what I build already looks good on a phone just because I have enough experience. So you kind of like hit this level. So when you first are learning responsive, you're going to build a lot of stuff. You're going to shrink it down, and like a lot of stuff's going to break at small screen sizes. And then you fix it all. And then the next time you go, it's a little easier, a little easier, a little easier. And so that's my process because I came up that way with coding, and that's like how I do. I start at the big screen and I shrink down. And in Builder, because of the way the media queries are built right now in Builder, that's the best way to do it in Builder. Start big and go small. There's a whole school of thought, and sometimes I do that. Like I would do this for client projects in the past if they requested it. There's a whole school of thought called mobile first, where you actually design for the smallest screen first, because it's actually easier. Like if it works on a small screen, almost definitely it's just going to work on a big screen. It's just going to be a little small or whatever. Whereas if you make it on a big screen, it's not almost definitely going to work on a small screen just because of the nature of it. So there's this theory of like mobile first, which is, it's valid. I mean, it's a good way to build, where you start with the simplest, smallest, like most straightforward version, and then you add to it as the screen gets bigger. But right now you can actually, like, I could do that in Builder, but it's very tricky to think that way in Builder because of the way with media queries that we're using, these screen sizes that are changing. You can either say, you can have a max width media query or a min width media query. And so those affect, all the default styles are on the smallest window size, or all the default styles are on the largest window size. That's kind of what they affect. So in code, you're using them both, and you use them in different ways. In Builder, we only have max width media queries. So that's why we go desktop, shrink it down. And there's no real problem with that or anything. It's definitely preference. Like that's how I built my whole career. But there is like, we get questions a lot of times. People read about mobile first, or they'll be used to mobile first and they'll ask about it. And it's like, you can do it if you really are comfortable with CSS and responsive. Otherwise, I would suggest starting with desktop first and shrinking down.
Okay, awesome. So, all right. So Peter, I hope that's has you covered on the responsive, or at least a good place to start. And then
Yeah.
we've got a few more questions. So we definitely had a request from Eric to do dynamic page routes, dynamic URL page routes, which I have like an easy example set up in a project that I could show, or if it's fast enough for you to build something real quick.
That
Drew.
would be faster, I think, if you did have it, because I would have to like create the database and create all the stuff. You know what I mean?
Okay, cool. So I can show that. And then we do have Peter Kirsten asking if we can show or hide something on a page depending on the URL parameter.
Yeah.
For example, if the URL parameter app equals iOS, so show top header. Does that relate to this?
You could do that as a way of doing responsive or device specific things for sure. Like that exact situation. Whoops. But I don't know if, you know, it depends on like, I wouldn't call that responsive necessarily, because you're actually setting that URL parameter. It's not based on screen size, but like that is a way to control stuff for sure. And what you can do, I can actually show that super fast. So I figure I could just do that quick. Let's see. So what you can do is I'll set a variable to pull something out of the URL. So I can say a variable on the current page called URL param. And to pull out of the URL, for the value of the variable, I come into text here. I come over to request, which is just a specific type of input. And request gives you, this is all like URL stuff. So I can actually come into query string here, and I can say, I forget exactly what that was, but let's say the query is app. And now the value of this variable will be whatever ! app equals in the URL. So that's how you actually pull in a URL parameter, which like, if you don't know URL parameters, I mean, it's like a code thing. You have to like learn what they are basically, but if you do know what they are, this should make sense to pull it in. And then if you want to do something based on it, you can do like, I would maybe do a conditional. So I'd say condition compare values. So I set this variable, and then I'm going to compare it to something. So in between, I want to make sure the variable is set. So in between, I'm going to click this don't wait, make sure it waits in between these actions. But I'll say set that variable URL param. Then come in here and say if the variable on the current page URL param equals iOS, then it's going to let me run a flow. So let me create a quick flow to hide the header. So I got this flow called hide header. It's going to have one action. I just type hide, element hide completely. I select this. The header is a component, remember, on this page. I could have named this header too, but I select that component to hide it. And so in this change based on URL, compare if URL param equals iOS, then hide the header. If it doesn't equal iOS, it's going to do nothing, but I could actually set a separate flow if I wanted there. And so now this change based on URL is flow works. It's done. The only thing I need to do is trigger it when the page loads. So I'll trigger it here on this page load action. I'm just going to nest change based on URL in here. So now when I run this page, it's going to look in the URL. If it finds app equals iOS, it's going to hide the header. And let me put something in the header so we can see it hide. So here, the header's up there. But if I say app equals iOS, then it loads and the header is hidden. So that's in a nutshell how to do it. Hopefully that wasn't too fast. But like if you did another one like header equals Android, it's not hidden because it looks for app in the query string, then it finds the value and sets the the variable. Oops. So it's set the variable of query string app. It's called URL param. Check if URL param equals iOS and run a flow. That's how you'd hide show things based on URL.
Sweet. Okay, I'm just getting a project ready to show the URL, dynamic URL routes. Okay, it looks like Mark might be able to join for a little bit. He's back from lunch with his daughter now. Any other questions? Oh, Eric says that's already what he was looking for.
Oh, nice, Eric. This it actually is like, if you want to just affect something on a page with a URL, this is a good way. The dynamic URLs has a whole extra level where if you have like an ID at the end of your URL, you can bind it to your database and like display information on the page and stuff. So you actually, dynamic URLs are more powerful, but yes, they'll definitely.
Okay.
Oh, got it.
Yeah. All right, cool. I will show. Bye, Edmund. Good to see you. Thanks for stopping by. All right, cool. I can show dynamic URL routes real quick, and then it looks like we can maybe touch on, Fraser was asking about building a really simple custom action, and then we have building a flyout, and then we have going over the creation of a carousel if we have time to go back to Agneva's thing. All right, so I'm trying to figure out a way where you guys won't see the mass amount of tabs that I have open, but I think you're just gonna have to see it. Okay, so screen share.
Drew, let's make a Chrome extension that just reports how many tabs you have open, and we keep like a leaderboard on a public site, you know? Yeah,
It's dangerous. You don't need to encourage that.
No, you really don't. You really don't. Cool. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
All right. So I have this really basic little list app pattern that I use for testing, and I just imported it into this new project. So I have a home page here. I've got a button that has a flow on it that opens up this new item page. And then I have a list row over here, which is showing for this grid here. And then I have an edit item page. So basically, if you click on a record from the grid, it'll open up the edit item page. So for the dynamic URL routes, what I can set up here is I'll make it so that as you click new item, you create a button, it creates a record here. When you actually click on one of those, it will open up that into its own tab. So I'll create a URL route for the edit item page. And then what I'll do is I'll show you how you can use dynamic mapping to create it so that the ID is shown in the URL route. I think that's kind of what you're asking, Eric. So to do that, basically, I'm going to come in here first and create a page route for the edit item page. I'm just going to call it item and then select my page. And then I am going to open this up. So I guess you kind of already have to have data bound to do this. I already have that set up. I'll just show you real quick. We'll come out of there. So this grid list is bound to a collection I created called items, which you can see here. And then these individual fields on the edit item page are already bound to data. So item name is bound to my items list with the item name field, and then same thing for item description. So I'm assuming that you kind of have all of that, and then you're just wondering how to do the URL route. All right, so let's go back into the URL route, and then I'm going to open up that item URL route that I created for the edit item page. So there's a little section here, a little toggle for creating dynamic page data based on that route. And you can learn more about it here with that little toggle. So I'm going to click this to yes, and I'm going to add a mapping. For data collection, I'm going to select the items data list because that's what I'm wanting to show when I'm actually opening up that item record. And then for field, I'm going to use the ID. You can use any one of the fields that you'll see for that collection. And then I'm just going to type segment number 0. And then I have a flow set up for, let's see, I think it's going to be on this one here. All right, so remember how I was saying when that list row is clicked, I want it to open up that record into a new tab. So I think I've got it here on events. I've got a flow called open edit item. And if I go into that flow, I'm using the open page in a browser tab, saying open this in a new tab. I'm saying open up the item route. And then for the after route text, I'm concatenating, which is basically just stringing together 2 values, and I'm doing a slash. And then what I'm doing here is just saying from the variable, from the current page, bring the ID. And I literally just type that in. And so now we can actually see how that works. So let me set the home page, page route. All right, so now we're looking at the home page. Let's create an item real quick. Let's call this cheesy burrito. Oops. Oh shit, sorry. I have some other sorry. I have some other stuff that I have to actually set up for this button. Let me see. I haven't tested this in a while. All right, open lightbox. Okay. Oh, I know. Here we go. You have to stop propagation, I think, with the lightbox thing. So let me do. I'm just going to add an event called do nothing. All right, I think we should be good now. Okay, so I've got my record here. So created a URL route for it, did the dynamic page mapping, and then on my action, when this is actually opening, I'm setting it to pull in and display that. So if I open that up, and I don't know if I can move this thing. Can y'all even see that at the top? Because I have the zoom controls. You can see it? Okay.
Yep.
All right, cool. So now what you're seeing is it opened up that cheesy burrito data record. And then I've got the item followed by the slash. And then now I have the item ID. So then you can use that to go and create whatever you're needing. Does that answer your question? Did I get that right, guys?
Yeah. The one thing I would add to that is when you selected segment number 0, that's actually what made it so that it's /item/ID. And you can do it other ways too. Like you can select query string, like I selected in my last example. And then it would look for, say you did query string ID, it would actually look for $ID equals that. And whatever value that is, that's what Builder grabs to know what to populate on the page. So in this case, it grabbed that AZRK, that's the ID for the cheesy burrito item. If there was a different ID up there, those inputs would be different values or blank if it didn't find that ID.
Yeah, but this is basically saying, go grab the ID and display it of the record that's being opened, right?
Yeah, it's the same as when you set a page into a grid list and you're setting values and like that, those inside the grid list, that page has the context of a record. When you do dynamic URLs, the whole page has a context of that record. And so you can use things like current record field value. You can use variables for each field name. You just get a lot of little perks.
Okay, cool. So yeah, did that answer your question, Eric? I'm not sure if
yeah, Cora, and
still
so that
on.
would work that
Yeah.
anyone pasting that into their browser would end up on the same page, right?
Yes.
Yeah, as long as they have that ID.
Yeah, and
Okay.
as long as if there's no authentication on that page, if you have authentication, then it's definitely not going to let you. But
Yeah.
there's
Okay.
there's none
Yeah,
of
my
that.
question was for people who have like they've created a profile and they would have a URL, and then they need to share that externally. Basically, anyone with that kind of friendly URL that you could read, like website name, person name, or something like that, then they could click on that and everyone would end up on the same page as long as they have the same length.
And you could do it with your own filtering too in that case. Like if you don't want to use the ID, like if you wanted to use say slash, maybe for like a blog or something is similar to
Yeah.
that, an actual name, right? So you put that slug, you can actually in your filter, rather than doing regular data bindings though, because there's no context, you would need to set those values inside of the page load or the page binding flow. So you would create set element value actions inside of
Okay,
each element. And
on the
then
page
each element
load.
is filtered manually using whatever you're filtering by.
You-
That way you
Yeah.
can just totally custom filtering.
You don't actually have to set those manually, right? So like so when she just set up an example, she selected in the dynamic page route, she selected ID field.
Yeah.
And segment 0. So Builder is basically saying it's going to look in that part of the URL and it's going to look for an ID. But if your database had a field called name,
Yeah.
and like this is a URL, so it can't have spaces. But say you had a field called like name with no spaces, and it was like first name dash last name. When you're setting up the dynamic route, instead of selecting ID, you select name no spaces. And now if the URL says like Drew-Thomas, Builder is going to look in the table you selected in the data collection users. It's going to look for one where the name no spaces value equals Drew-Thomas, and then it's going to pull in all the context.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to actually set values with actions. You can just use them with binding. So like that's kind of, so I think that's what you're asking basically is like if you had like profile / Drew-Thomas, but also if you wanted to have like / edit account, and then anyone who signed in, if they go to / edit account, it's their account. That's a little different. So I'm not sure if that's what you meant.
And
I meant the first one.
Sounds like for user profiles, right? That would be the use case.
Yeah, it's a public page for anyone to go to.
Yeah.
And they should see the information for the kind of the profile or the business they're visiting.
Yeah. It would be like you could use the ID like we just did, like that would work. But because the ID looks so crazy for something like a profile, I would suggest you just create another field, which is it's often called like URL slug, like people call it slug. But basically it's just like no quotes, no spaces, no dots, because they can't be in a URL. So you just, when they enter their first and last name, you might in the background put those together with a dash and save it as a new field. And that's like your slug field. And then you use that. So you'd have, /profile /slug. And whatever is on that page, it's going to be specific to the slug, to the person, not the person who signed in, but the person who's in that URL slug. Anyone can see it. Yeah.
Okay.
You can also in that flow, when you're setting the two values together to do like first name, last name, you can use an action called remove special characters on each value beforehand. So that way, if they do type a special character in there or put spaces in the first name, it'll remove all that, then concatenate it together. And then, you've got your value that's clean. Because sometimes they might put some crazy thing that you allow in the name, but you don't allow it in the slug.
Yeah. Okay. That is very good advice, because it's not even names a person's name. It'd be like a project name. So some projects would be,
could be anything,
two, three, maybe more words. And then of course there's going to be spaces in there.
Yep.
That's nice.
All right. So cool.
Eric,
Yeah.
I just responded. I didn't know you were in here. I responded to you in Discord just a minute ago about getting the current user ID also.
Okay. I will follow up with you there. We've got a very weird
Right.
project. I'll send everyone a message about it later.
We love the weird projects. All right, so looks like we have a few more questions. One of them was how to build a flyout in Builder. And then the other one was, I think we answered Peter Kirsten's question. All right, so how to build a flyout in Builder. Then we have building a custom action for Fraser, and then the carousel creation thing for Agnipa, which we might end up doing in Discord if it's going to take us reading through the docs.
Yeah, I think I'll probably just find that and send that one, because it's just like I have to find that one line. It's like such an easy thing, but it would take too long to find. I don't think.
Okay.
Let's do it here.
Cool. So we will do that one.
I can show Fraser how I did the console log one, even not knowing how the JavaScript works. I was able to build the custom action. But what was the other one that you wanted to do first, Cora? What was the other one?
A
So
flyout.
it doesn't matter. Peter's asking about how to create a flyout. So if we can build something super simple to show that, and then he actually has to go, so he's just going to watch the recording to catch that later. So we've got that, and then custom action, and then Drew's going to do the Agnevis carousel question in Discord.
Cool. So Drew, do you want to do the flyout? And I'll set up a custom action real quick. I'll get like
Sure.
stuff ready to go.
We
So
could
for-
also show a flyout if you have one in a project. I don't know.
Oh,
know
I
we
can
have
build it
lots
so
of them in
fast. I
Builder,
mean,
but-
I have them in
Okay.
every project probably, but let's see. Let me just figure out the best way to make it not a jumbled thing here. So if I do a new page, basically for a flyout, what I'm doing, whatever I want my flyout to be, is I'm going to hold it in a div. So whatever that's styled, whatever's inside it, whatever, I'm going to put a div for my flyout. I'm going to have one set of styles when it's out, one set of styles when it's hidden. And then I'm going to add and remove a class basically to change those styles. So what that's going to allow me to do is go from the hidden state to the visual state with a transition. So to put that all together, like add a div, and again, well, I'll just do this in classes actually. So this would be flyout, right? And I'm going to style it as if it was out. So I would say maybe, so for a flyout, another thing is like usually you want them over top of other things, or like position absolute, it's called. So if you don't know positions in CSS, it might be confusing, but everything by default is going to like affect each other and fall in line. For a flyout, you want it to go over top of other things. So you set position to absolute or fixed. I guess actually I'll do fixed for this one. So if you don't know what that is, you might have to just like look that up in CSS. That's pure CSS, not Builder. But once I make it position fixed, I set a few styles. Like I'll set a right, a top, a width, a height. And you can see how I'm doing this a lot of times, how I set stuff up where I'll just like blast in all the styles I know are going to be there and then go fill them out. And so with position fixed, they get a few properties like right and top work that normally you might not use, but I'm going to set, this is positioning it. So I'm going to set the right to 0, the top to 0, the width to 50%, and the height to 100%. And then we'll set the background to black so we can see it. So you can see I've got that 50% wide flyout here. And then to hide it, I add a utility class. So I almost always, you can call it obviously whatever you want, but I almost always call things whatever the name is -hidden. And so the way I'm going to hide this is I'm going to say transform translate X 100%. So that might not be the way you hide it. You can actually hide it in a million different ways. Simplest way to hide something being opacity, but if you use opacity and it stays on your screen, it might overlap other things, but you can see like that opacity is 0 now. So even if I didn't have this in there, the opacity is still 0, it's hidden versus when it's shown. But I can put those both in there. So basically what it is when it's hidden, it'll be slid off the page and invisible. And then last step is on this flyout main class, I add a transition. And this is technically optional, but if you add a transition, that's what actually makes it fly out. And transition, again, like CSS, I hate when I have to do this, but you basically just have to look it up to know what to type. I can do something like all properties, 0.25 second transition and ease out. So that's like a shorthand to write a transition. In a real production app, I would actually get really specific with like the timing and which properties and all. You can go crazy with these transitions. That's a simple version. So now I've got flyout hidden. If I remove this flyout hidden class, you're going to see comes in and goes out. And actually, I thought that would have transitioned. Let me just double check I wrote that right. So that's that. And let's do this. I'm going to test this now. Position test. And so if I tested this now, technically it would all work to fly it out, but I need something to actually trigger the flyout. So I'm just going to create a button. But basically I'm going to start this page with the flyout on the page and the flyout hidden. And then I'll have just like a button on here. And when the button is clicked, I'll go a new flow called show flyout. And this flyout flow, what I'm doing is adding that class or removing that class, the hidden class. So to show it, I'm going to remove class, element, remove style class, select the class, flyout hidden, and then select the element I want to remove it from, which is that div. So now I got to set a URL route for this, and then I'll test it. So now it's not there. I hit the button, slides in. And then just to finish that off, I have a show flyout action. I can do a hide flyout as well, which instead of removing that class, I'm just going to add the class flyout hidden to the div. And then to do this really simply, I'll just make 2 buttons. Normally what I would do is I would actually change the action on this button when it shows, which I can show you how to set up if you want, but I'll get a little more advanced. For this, I'll just do 1 button for show, 1 button for hide, and go hide flyout. So we got show and hide, and that's a flyout. And anything you put in this flyout, so if I want to edit this on the page, I can go to the flyout, remove the hidden class, and I've got it visual here. So I can, like put stuff inside of it. Make this white. And whatever's in there will show up. And then because I want it hidden at first, I just have to remember before I publish or preview, go add that flyout hidden back in.
Nice, because by default, you probably want it to be closed, which is why you're hiding it.
Yep.
And then you just show it. Okay.
Yeah,
Same
you could
thing
do
with
this.
light
You could do it
boxes,
the
I
opposite way
think.
I did it too. You could have it shown at first and then hide it, or you could have the default state of your classes, it's all hidden, and then you add a class called shown. You can do it all different ways. I usually do it by defaulting what it would look like and then adding a hidden class. That's kind of just my method.
Okay. Awesome.
And as I was talking about that too, I do think one thing to add is there's this lightbox panel element. So as I was making this, I was like, oh, you know what? Like you could just drop this element on here. So you have lightbox panel, and then I think it comes with actions, right? Or do I remember that wrong?
It does, and there's also a tutorial on using light boxes. So it'll bring in, I think, like the light box, right? Hidden, yeah.
You can see like it's the same setup I just made. It just comes default. So you can add or remove this hidden. If I remove this hidden class, it would like show a light box. There's actually 2 on the light box, so it would look. It's really big, but there's like a right panel of white light box there. But if you use the default actions that come, like when you drop that in, you get those actions, then it's actually, you don't need to think about any of this stuff. You just use it.
Yeah, then all you actually think about are going to be the flows. So adding a style class to show it, and then, using the add style class to show, or the remove style class, whichever
it'll
one.
be the same thing as in here. I'll just add 2
Yeah.
style classes to the outer and inner lightbox div or whatever I
Mhm.
make. So it's pretty much versatile where you're adding and removing classes to hide and show stuff. And you can do it easier if you just want to hide and show, like snap. There's actions that are like hide element and show element. But anytime you want to transition, do it this way with classes, and then you can transition any properties you want visually.
Cool.
No,
All right, I think,
one thing I'd add
sorry,
here,
go ahead.
in the
Mhm.
a lot of times I'll do my menus as like the menu that's going to show inside of that. I'll actually create a separate page for whatever's going to be inside of there. And then on click, I show it and I open that page into the div. And the nice thing about that is then I have this separate page where I can always see the elements and everything that's going to be on it. And it keeps the context of just that by itself. And I can reuse that menu in different UI contexts throughout the project then whatever I'm building. So that's typically how I'll do that. It depends on what it is. And then there's also one other way where, like, let's say you had a little hamburger button and you didn't want it to be like this big slide in thing. You just want it to be, you know, like a little menu. It's all just styling at that point, right? So there's really not much difference. There's really no difference between what Drew did there to slide a whole panel in versus like, I'm just going to show this little menu. The only difference would be size, shape, color, and what's your method of moving it in and out. Like Drew was saying, pop it in or slide it in or however you want to do it, but it's all styling at that point.
Okay, awesome. Peter's not on the call anymore, so we don't know if that answered his question, but when you watch this recording later, let us know if you have a specific example you're curious about. But sounds like there's a lot of different ways to do it. So we got a good glimpse of one. So next up, can we do, oh yeah, that's good feedback, David. Thank you. The cool thing though is if you learn how to make elements, you're never having to wait on us. So that is a plus to that. And then also when we release sharing for other people, you'll be able to easily get elements. But we don't want to fill up the list with a whole bunch of stuff you might never use. So then it'll be a lot easier for you to get what you want.
All
right.
You have both, like long-term, easy to find shared things on a marketplace style view,
Yes.
plus here's all the base level things. So it is,
Yes.
that's what we want.
Yes, and you can always request if you do have like an element that you really need or you're not sure how to make, just ask us and we'll see if we have time, we'll make one for you. Like Mark made a slider earlier this week. So yeah, we're always open to that.
Yeah, those
and
like if I have 20 minutes, I'll just go pop it in there because it really didn't, that slider took like 20 or 30 minutes to do. Same thing with the console log. I'll show in just a moment how to do these custom ones, and they're not very hard.
Cool. And then we've also got more templates and all that good stuff coming. So we will definitely work on building those out over time. But if you ever need something specific, just ask us. And then Mark, are you down to show simple custom action for Fraser?
Yeah, so let me know, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Cool. All right, so I made a blank project here. And what I'm going to do is make a brand new custom JavaScript action that will then show up in the studio as a custom thing that I made. I'm going to use the console log. It was something that Fraser had asked for last week, I think. And basically, I'm not a JavaScript developer. I can read it, but I can't write it from scratch. But what I can do is like copy paste really well. I'm very good at that. So what I did to go make that console log is I literally just went to Google, typed console log JavaScript, and clicked on the Mozilla.org version of it and just got exactly what it needs to be. So typically I could read through this and kind of see the details of what it is. This is like probably, if not the simplest, one of the simplest JavaScript functions that exists out there. And it's literally just this. So the way this will work is whatever goes inside of those things is going to get logged to the console in the browser. So I literally came here, copied, I think I copied this one, just Command C, came over into my project, went to functions, new action type, console log, and I think there's already one in here. So I'll just do console log 2, create the function. And then I know that I need two things. I need the JavaScript and I need one input argument to take as what's the thing that's going to be logged. So I'm going to use these two tabs here, properties and JavaScript. So I'll go to JavaScript, and first thing I'm going to do is just paste my function in there. Now, normally it's a more complicated function than this, so you're going to do a little more work. You're going to paste it in and maybe format it or do whatever you want there. For now, I'm just going to leave that there. Now I'm going to make an input, and we'll call it maybe value to log. We'll call it that. Okay, now this is the part where I start copying and pasting from other things, because like I don't know what to write in here to make it work properly. So what I typically will do is go to another function that exists in here already. So I'll go to one like set variable, and I'm just going to go look at how it works. Okay, so the only thing that I know I need here is I need to take that input argument, and I need to use that input argument inside of my inside of the console log function. So this first line here, typically at the top of our functions, there's going to be a line that is taking the input arguments and making them usable inside of the JavaScript. So I'm literally just going to copy this first line, go back over to my console log, go back to the JavaScript, paste that in, and then I'm going to start changing some things here. So this one is actually simpler. I don't need any of this stuff. I literally just want this first part. Let's see, what did I call it? Value to log. Okay, so I'm going to go value to log, from value to log input argument, and then this needs to be used inside of here. I think that's it. Is that right, Drew? Am I missing something there? Yeah, okay. I think that's all I had to do. Okay,
You
so
never know.
what this did was saying when the JavaScript runs, it's going to basically create a value inside of the JavaScript function called value to log, and it's going to get that from the input argument called value to log. And then it will run the actual JavaScript and log whatever that value is, right? So that's what this is going to do now. So the next step is going to be to make an action type. So what I just created was the JavaScript function that Builder can execute inside the queue whenever the project is going. Now what I need to do is make an action type that runs this JavaScript, so that way someone who doesn't know anything about code can just use it as an action. So to do that, I'm going to go over to action types. I'm going to make a new one, and we'll call it console log 2. And then I have to start filling some things out. So the main things that matter here are the arguments and the functions. The rest of it's sort of like descriptive information that can be anything you want. So the only argument I have here is the one called value to log, and it does need to be the same. So what I put over there where it said input arguments dot value to log in the JavaScript function, that has to match this name. That's the only key piece here. Oh, actually, no, it doesn't. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was about to say, no, it doesn't.
In a minute, I have to select it. This can actually still be anything. Sorry, this can be anything you want. In a minute, we will do that though. We have to make sure we connect those dots. Okay, so now I created this input argument. And what I want to do inside that input argument is tell it, you know how when you go into an action and there's that type menu, that type menu is built from the selections here. So for the value to log, where do I want to allow the user inside the Builder Studio to get the information for this value from? In this case, I kind of want it from everywhere. I want them to be able to get it from basically anything. So I'm going to kind of like check all the boxes. I want them to be able to merge data together, to get current user information, to just write some text, maybe do it as a text area. We'll let them concatenate some things, pull some stuff out of the request. Like you can just do everything. So now what that means is whenever they put this action on there, these ones that I checked are the types that they can use. So I'll close that. And then the last step, we're going to add a function. And the function we want is our console log 2 here. That's the function we just created a minute ago. And you just type an alias in here. And the reason you need an alias is because you can actually run multiple functions inside of an action type. So like sometimes you'll have an action type that runs, maybe for like the API request, for instance, it runs an API request and then it gets the response back and then it uses another function to set that response into a variable. So it does HTTP call is function 1, and then it waits and then sets the variable as function 2. And because of that, you need to have unique names across these. So we have an argument and we have a function. If I open the function, it's going to show me the input arguments that I created on the function. So that value to log needs to be passed. So basically this is telling Builder whatever the user where do you want to get the value for that function? What I'm going to do is tell it to come from the action input argument, which is going to be this one. And that's it for this one's a really simple one. So if you have a function that has like multiple, an action type that has multiple functions, you can do things like first function can pass data to the second function so it can finish and then pass along. You can also just do static values in here and just type it in. And you can actually go even further. If you want to do like really complex stuff, you can actually go into the JSON and see how this is structured. And in some of our more complex ones, you can do things like put conditional logic inside of here. So like if this value from that is this, then run this function next. If not, then run this other function next. Like you can get very, very complex in there. But this is probably the most basic one here. So you need at least one argument. Actually, sometimes you don't need an argument. You can actually do this without arguments depending on what the function is. And then the function, you have to have at least one function, and then you define in the function, where does that function get the inputs for whatever it's trying to do. Once I've created this, then back here, if I go to a flow and click there, go to console, I'm going to see that I have this custom console log 2 action type now. And I can just click add there, and I'm going to get that information. Whatever I put into the action type is going to show up here. So that's it. So that basically I just created a custom JavaScript function, custom action type. And now in my project, in this particular project, I have that as a custom action that I can use. Now when I did it the other day, I put it into but I put it into a project where I can go in and actually say, share this with everyone. So the last step that I did after I did this, I tested it, made sure it all worked, and then I went in and clicked the button to share it. But does that answer, Fraser, for how to create those? I know there can be a lot more complex ones, but that's about as simple as one gets.
We got a thumbs up.
Cool.
Good job.
Cool. Yeah, those. It's fun getting to dive in a little bit with code. Like that's as far as I want to go. I don't want to have to like actually write any of it, but the copying and pasting, I'm good. I like that part of it. And there are other things like there's a lot of complex stuff you can do in there. Like your JavaScript function can tell the queue, Builder's internal core queue, to stop and wait until it finishes. So like don't execute anything else until this finishes. And then at the end of your function, you can say, okay, now run again. So you can actually use your JavaScript function to completely manipulate how the execution core is operating. That's quite a bit more detail, and I actually don't know how to, I can copy paste that too, but I know you can do it.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I think, yes, Emmanuel, that's great to hear. I'm glad to hear that. All right. So I think this was a really interesting session because we started from like super basic styling to then ending with a custom function. And there's like so much to learn. So I think this is also another good case for office hours. So we can, you know what I mean? It's probably harder to fit it all in like a dedicated builder session. So office hours, I think,
Office
is going to
days.
be office days. Yeah, might be needed. So yeah, we'll talk about that as a team and then get a plan together and chat y'all. Otherwise, thank you so much. I will upload this, and then if you guys have anything else, we'll try and get those office hours going so we can do some more of this stuff. Otherwise, if it can go in Discord and we can help you that way, do please chat us there. Okay. All right. David has a quick question asking about new features that we're about to release and what's coming soon. All right. So I can just recap on that, or Mark, if you want to. Okay, cool. All right, so new features that are in this coming update that we're going to do hopefully in the next few weeks. We shall see unless we break something else. So Mark's built out a totally new data UI area. So this is going to be where you can actually see the data in your project, manipulate it, add data manually, delete it, whatever, it's going to be all there for you. And then we've also got some really awesome stuff as far as onboarding and changes to importing patterns and starting from projects. Like we have a SaaS starter template. That's what David's really asking about. That's like a fully built out app. And one of my favorite things that we did in this release is that now when you import a pattern or you bring in a template, we've made some changes so that you don't have to create the routes. It'll just work. You can literally go preview it and it'll start working. That is a huge thing, because before it might not work if you had to go create a route for this page and then connect it to here and there. So that was a big thing. So now, I'm very, very excited about that. And then, so that'll make it a lot easier. And then also for people who are onboarding, they can just pull this in and then get started. And then what else do we have? There's like a lot of stuff that we did as far as speed ups, but that's all complicated stuff that I don't even know how to explain. What else, Mark?
I mean, we actually, there's a ton in this one, and Cora will be
Yeah.
writing release notes here pretty soon on this one.
Oh,
but
yeah.
but I'm actually really happy with the efficiency stuff that we got on the core side.
Yeah.
We did a lot of work on just optimizing the static files that are distributed through the CDN that drive all of this. There were some things in there where it was doing these hops and back and forth that it just takes too long, especially if you're pretty far away from the data center in the region that you're in. It's just way too much back and forth. So we removed almost all of that. We also made the studio itself quite a bit faster. There was a bunch of pieces, same kind of thing. We were trying to pre-cache too much stuff in the front end in JavaScript, like go out and get all these things. And it was just making everything have to wait for that. We removed all of that and made the actual like real-time gets much, much faster. There's probably 10 or 20 smaller things like that throughout the UI. And then Dorian did some amazing work on the input arguments. Someone asked earlier in the Discord about they were hitting a limit on like, it was basically it's capping out because we were just writing way too much JSON into the action instances for like you would go, so you add 5 different or 10 different things to your API requests, like key values. It was just too much JSON. So Dorian cut that down. I think it's like 30 or 40% of what it was. So we should see a lot better. That's good for all kinds of things. That's good for, you can add more things, but it's also cuts down like 30 to 40% of the size of those static files that are being distributed in the first place. So not only do we optimize the performance of the distribution, but also just like cut the size down a ton. So every release cycle, we like to do things like that. So that's probably my favorite part. You got your favorite part? That's my favorite part.
Yeah. Yeah. Except
Mine
that
too.
also is the part that broke everything. And that's what we're debugging right now. So that's why it's taking a lot longer than if we were to just like add in a new feature. It's the underlying stuff usually that.
That's perfect, John.
Longer time
Is
to
Space
work.
Gray the right thing now? I feel like John Ivy's not there anymore, right? Is he still there? Exactly.
And we also did what did we do? Oh yeah, we have a new additions to the Chrome extension, right? Like some additional settings or features.
Making the new tab super easy. It's just a toggle now, and then other changes to like the UI of exporting it, and yeah, we'll continue every release. That'll get more and more things added into it too.
So new things for that. And then we did some new authentication stuff. We're going to release some authentication stuff for Metamask or.
Yeah, there's well, the Metamask auth. You can already do Metamask auth right now, but this is Metamask mixed with our identity server. So when you sign in, when you sign up, like you can actually let your users sign up with their wallet address, right? And when we do that, we actually store their wallet address as the user ID effectively. And then we create a Web2 session and send it back out. So what's really cool about that is you can super easily create like gated content or really everything. All user permission stuff that's built into Builder is just automatically usable now with signing in with MetaMask, which I think is going to be a really big deal longer term. Still so early in Web3.
I think it's the future of all websites. Just to get an idea of how big that is. Like I actually think that's literally the future. And we're one of the few no-code platforms that are going to be doing this like true identity server, actual like non-hackable sign in with MetaMask. So I mean, if you're saying favorite things, that might be my favorite. I'm super excited for that to come out.
I actually forgot about it.
Change my answer. That's my favorite.
And like, what else? There's so much. Dorian, can you think of anything? Was there anything you worked on that?
Million things.
I know there's so
Everything.
much because I think we've been working on this one for like 3 months now, 3 or 4 months now. Yeah.
Yesterday we squeezed in the revision change stuff.
Oh yeah.
Got you, Fraser.
Done.
Back and forth with. Yeah, Dorian, you got all that done yesterday.
And it's got a nice warning. So if you're going to override your project, you know for sure what you're doing. So use wisely. And yeah, I think Drew did some work on merging changing the publish so you can easily see your deployments and open them from that menu, and then also the live preview. Yeah, there's a lot of small stuff and big stuff in the UI. Yeah, so plan is for us to like test through all of that and get all the static file stuff done, and then do our testing cycle and then push out to you guys. So that is cool. And also all the little bugs that y'all are finding and chatting in Discord, we're like fixing, which is awesome because you're finding stuff that we can't possibly test because it's so unique to different setups. So that's really, really great. That's been super helpful. So thank you for telling us when you guys are having problems, for sure. Okay. Is that it? Okay. We shall keep pushing forward. Chat us and let us know, if you need help. And then I'll talk to you guys about Builder open office hour time. Otherwise, have a great weekend. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.